Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever thought about time travel?
Heh, not the sci-fi kind, I take it.
Exactly. Not zipping around in machines. Something, well, quieter, more personal. What if you could actually step back hundreds of years
Right.
and see a place, I mean, a whole subcontinent, not just as it was, but, how it looked to someone seeing it for the very first time?
Ah, okay. Someone who'd notice things the locals might just take for granted. Things that were just normal life for them.
Precisely. And that's what we get to do in this deep dive. We're going to sort of travel through time and space by looking at these amazing historical accounts.
Accounts from visitors to the Indian subcontinent, right? Between, what, the 10th and 17th centuries, roughly?
Yeah, exactly. These travelers, they found worlds so different from their own. And when they wrote about those differences, they gave us this unique window.
A window into everyday life, social structures, maybe even landscapes. Stuff that local writers might just skip over because, well, it was just there, obvious to them.
You got it. Seeing the world through fresh eyes. And we're focusing specifically on accounts from three really fascinating men mentioned in our source material, each from a different place, a different time.
Okay, so who are we talking about?
First, Al-Biruni. He was a scholar from Uzbekistan back in the 11th century.
Right, the early one. Very learned.
Then Ibn Battuta, a bit later, 14th century, from Morocco. A real explorer type, just went everywhere.
Ah, yes, the globetrotter. His journeys are legendary.
And finally, François Bernier, French, 17th century. A doctor, a philosopher, visiting the Mughal Empire.
So, three quite different people, different centuries, different backgrounds, giving us these unique lenses on, well, roughly the same part of the world.
Exactly. So our mission here is to really unpack what they saw, their key observations, the surprising details, the insights.
And crucially, their perspectives, right? Maybe even their biases, because nobody sees things completely objectively.
Absolutely. We need to look at how they interpreted what they saw. And by doing that, you, the listener, get a shortcut to being really well informed about this incredible historical period, seen through these specific, sometimes really surprising viewpoints.
Like, it's kind of like having three different tour guides for the same historical site. One's focused on the ancient texts and ideas.
Yeah, another's all about the adventure, the strange sights, the lived experience.
And the third one, well, maybe he has a point he's trying to prove, a specific argument.
Exactly. So let's start with guide number one, the incredibly learned Al-Biruni.
Okay. Al-Biruni, born 973, Khwarizm, that's in modern Uzbekistan. And this wasn't just anywhere. It was a major center of learning back then.
So he had a good start, top-notch education.
Definitely. And his language skills were apparently phenomenal. We're talking Syriac, Arabic, Persian, Hebrew, and then he went and learned Sanskrit.
Wow. And Greek philosophy, too.
Yeah, he knew Greek philosophy, likely through Arabic translations that were available. He didn't necessarily read Greek itself, but he was familiar with the key ideas. A real intellectual powerhouse.
So he's steeped in scholarship. How does he end up connected to India? It wasn't exactly next door.
Well, his arrival in Ghazni, which is in modern Afghanistan in 1017, wasn't, shall we say, entirely voluntary.
Oh.
Sultan Mahmud invaded Khwarizm, and he brought back several scholars, including Al-Biruni, to his capital, Ghazni. Kind of like valuable captives, or maybe acquisitions is a better word.
Right, like collecting talent. But he stayed.
He did. Interestingly, even though he arrived under duress, he seems to have actually grown to like Ghazni. He spent the rest of his life there, died when he was 70.
And Ghazni became his base for learning about India.
Pretty much, especially when the Punjab region became part of the Ghaznavid Empire after Mahmud's conquests. That expansion really opened the door for contact.
Oh, okay. So proximity helped.
Definitely. And this is key. He spent years, the source really emphasizes this, years, with Brahmana priests and scholars.
Learning directly from them.
Yes, learning Sanskrit, which he himself said was a huge challenge, and really diving deep into Indian religious and philosophical texts, things like the Vedas, the Puranas, the Bhagavad Gita.
So he wasn't just reading translations back in Ghazni. He was in India, or at least the Punjab.
It seems very likely. While the sources don't give us a precise travel map, it's almost certain he traveled quite a bit in the Punjab and maybe other parts of northern India during this time, gathering information firsthand.
That level of dedication is incredible. On the ground, talking to people, learning the language from scratch. So why did he write his big book, the Kitab-ul-Hind? What was his goal? Who was he writing for?
He actually laid it out pretty clearly. The source says he wrote it mainly for two reasons. One, to help people who wanted to discuss religious questions with Hindus.
Okay, practical dialogue.
Right. And two, to provide information for people who just wanted to associate with them, maybe for trade or other interactions. Travel writing was already a thing in Arabic then, so he was part of a tradition.
But with a specific focus on, like, intercultural understanding, especially for people near the borders.
Exactly. His likely audience was probably people living along the frontiers of the Ghaznavid Empire, people who might have some contact already but needed a much deeper, more reliable understanding of Indian society and thought.
That makes a lot of sense, building an intellectual bridge. So tell us about the book itself, the Kitab-ul-Hind. What's it like?
Well, it's huge. Voluminous is the word used, but written in apparently quite simple, clear Arabic, which is impressive given the complex topics.
And what does it cover? You said it was huge.
Oh, everything. It's structured into 80 chapters. 80. Covering this incredible range: religion, philosophy, festivals, astronomy, alchemy, maths, geography, chronology,
Right.
but also detailed stuff about manners, customs, social life, weights and measures, art, laws. It's like he tried to create an encyclopedia of Indian knowledge and society as he understood it.
80 chapters on everything from the stars to how people live day to day. That is comprehensive. Did he have a system, a structure for organizing all that?
Yes, and it's quite interesting. He had this distinctive structure he generally followed in each chapter.
Okay.
He'd start with a question. Then he'd give a description based on the Sanskritic traditions, the stuff he learned from the texts and the scholars.
Right, the Indian perspective first.
Exactly. And then he'd wrap up by comparing that Indian perspective to other cultures he knew, Greek, Islamic, Persian, whatever, was relevant.
Ah, so comparison was key for him too, but maybe in a different way than Bernier later, more explanatory.
Precisely. It was about contextualizing and understanding. Some scholars even think this very neat, almost geometric structure, question, description, comparison, might actually reflect his background in mathematics.
That's fascinating. His scientific mind shaping how he presented cultural information.
Yeah.
But even with all this study, he saw challenges, right? Barriers to really getting Indian society.
Oh, definitely. He was very clear about the difficulties. The first big one, language. Yeah. He found it fundamentally different from Arabic and Persian. He said translating concepts, especially technical terms, was incredibly tough. He called Sanskrit a language with an enormous range, complex like Arabic, lots of words for one thing, one word meaning many things, made precision really hard.
So not just learning vocabulary, but grappling with a whole different way the language itself worked and the ideas embedded in it.
Exactly. A different conceptual world expressed through language. The second barrier he saw was, well, pretty obvious. The big differences in religious beliefs and practices.
Okay, that makes sense. And the third?
The third was his perception of the local population. He described what he saw as their self-absorption and consequent insularity. He felt they were kind of closed off to outsiders, maybe a bit resistant to sharing their knowledge, especially with people who didn't follow their traditions.
Those are pretty big hurdles. Language, religion, and this feeling of insularity. Yet you said he relied almost entirely on Brahmanical texts, Vedas, Puranas, Gita, Manusmriti. Doesn't that reliance, especially if he felt people were insular, potentially, skew his view, limit his perspective?
It absolutely does, and that's a crucial point historians make. Even though he identified these barriers and had this critical mind, his understanding is inevitably filtered through the lens of the Brahmanical tradition. That's what he studied most deeply, what he had access to.
So his account reflects the sort of official or normative view from those texts, which might not be the whole picture of how everyone lived.
Exactly. It's heavily shaped by that textual perspective, which isn't to say it's not valuable. It's incredibly valuable, but it's a specific slice, mostly the normative view, which might differ from the lived reality for many people.
Okay, let's look at a big example. The caste system. How did he tackle that in the Kitab-ul-Hind?
Well, one thing he did was try to find parallels. He looked at other societies he knew.
Like where?
Ancient Persia, for instance. He noted they had 4 social categories: knights, princes, monks, priests, lawyers, physician scientists, and then peasants, artisans.
Ah, so by showing that, he's kind of saying, look, social divisions aren't totally unique to India, making it less alien.
Exactly. It was a way to frame it, to make it relatable. But he also looked at it from his own Islamic perspective.
Oh, so?
He made the point that in Islam, the belief is that all men are considered equal before God. The only real difference is in piety, how devout someone is. So that was a clear contrast he drew.
Right, a different standard of value. And how did he actually describe the Indian system, the Varna system, based on the texts he read?
He laid out the Brahmanical account pretty faithfully, the idea of the four main groups originating from parts of Brahman's body.
Okay, the standard description.
Yeah. The Brahmana from the head, the highest and purest, the Kshatriya from the shoulders and hands, next down, the Vaishya from the thigh, and the Shudra from the feet. He noted the text suggested the gap between Vaishya and Shudra wasn't huge, so he described the theory as he found it.
Okay, so he describes the structure, but, and this seems really important, he had a major issue with one core aspect. The idea of ritual pollution, right? This is where his own thinking comes through strongly.
This is where his scientific, logical mind really comes to the forefront. It's a key insight. He strongly disagreed with the notion of pollution as applied in the caste system.
Why? What was his argument?
He argued from nature. He observed that everything impure in the natural world tries to get back to being pure. The sun cleans the air, salt in the sea stops the water going bad, that kind of thing.
Okay, natural purification processor.
Exactly. So he reasoned logically that if things couldn't regain purity after becoming impure, life on Earth would just be impossible. Therefore, this whole idea of social pollution, that contact with certain people or doing certain jobs makes you permanently or difficultly impure, that, he said, was contrary to the laws of nature.
Wow, that's a fundamental critique. Using natural laws and logic to challenge a social concept. It shows he wasn't just copying text, he was thinking critically.
Absolutely. Applying his own analytical framework. And it's worth remembering again, while he described the system based on these normative texts, the day-to-day reality, as the source material mentions, was often more complex.
Right. Theory versus practice.
Yeah. Like, people outside the four main varnas, the Antyaja, they were often included in economic life out of sheer necessity, providing essential labor, even while facing severe social discrimination. The lived experience could be messier than the neat textual model.
That's a vital distinction. Did he ever show skepticism about specific stories or beliefs he recorded, besides the pollution idea?
Yes. There's a great little anecdote about a wooden idol.
Oh, yeah?
He mentions being told a story about this wooden idol that had supposedly lasted for, get this, over 200,000 years.
200,000 years. For wood.
Exactly. His immediate reaction was basically, really, huh? He questioned how wood could last that long, especially in what he saw as a wet climate. And after telling the story, he adds this little phrase, God knows best.
Huh. A touch of personality. Skeptical, but maybe leaving a little room for doubt.
Precisely. It shows his rational mind questioning the claim, but also maybe acknowledging things beyond human understanding. It makes him feel more real.
Definitely. So Al-Biruni gave us this incredibly detailed, scholarly, text-heavy view, trying to systematize, understand, compare, critique based on logic.
Yeah.
A massive intellectual effort.
Right, an intellectual engaging with a new intellectual world, mainly through its texts. And his work had influence outside India, plus he did translation work to Sanskrit, to Arabic, even translating Euclid into Sanskrit, a real bridge builder.
Quite a legacy. Okay, so that's the scholarly observer. Now let's jump forward, 3 centuries?
Yeah.
To a very different kind of traveler, someone driven more by experience, wanderlust.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Ibn Battuta, born in Tangier, Morocco, 1304. His family were experts in Islamic law, the Sharia, so similar background to Al-Biruni in some ways, educated in religious law.
But he didn't stick to the books?
Not primarily, no. He had this core belief, very different from Al-Biruni. He felt that experience gained through travels was actually more important than knowledge just from books. The source puts it perfectly. He just loved traveling.
You could definitely say that. His journeys were immense. What had he already seen before he even got to India around 1333?
Oh, he was already a seriously seasoned traveler by then. He'd done the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, obviously a big deal. But he'd also traveled all over North Africa, the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Persia, Yemen, Oman, and even down the East African coast. A proper globetrotter before the term existed.
So he had a huge frame of reference. He wouldn't be easily shocked or impressed.
Mm-hmm.
How did he end up heading towards Delhi?
He traveled overland through Central Asia, reaching the Indus Valley, Sindh, in 1333, and he had heard about the Sultan of Delhi at the time, Muhammad bin Tughlaq.
What had he heard?
That the Sultan had this reputation for being incredibly generous, especially to scholars and learned men. So hearing this, Ibn Battuta saw an opportunity for patronage and headed towards Delhi via Multan and Ukutch.
And did the Sultan live up to the reputation?
Apparently so. The Sultan was impressed by Ibn Battuta's learning and background in Islamic law and appointed him as Qazi, the judge of Delhi. A pretty important job.
Wow, straight into a major role in the capital. Did he stay long?
He was there for several years, serving as judge. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. He apparently fell out of favor with the Sultan at one point, even got thrown in prison briefly.
Really? What happened?
The source doesn't detail the misunderstanding, just that it happened, but it was eventually cleared up and he was back in the Sultan's good graces. And then, in 1342, the Sultan gave him an even bigger task.
Which was?
To be the Sultan's envoy, his ambassador, to the Mongol ruler over in China.
So his Indian travels didn't stop at Delhi. That mission took him much further.
Much further. After leaving Delhi for China, he continued traveling extensively within and beyond the subcontinent. He went down the Malabar coast.
The southwest coast, right? Big trading area.
Exactly. Then off to the Maldives Islands, where, believe it or not, he ended up staying for 18 months, working as a qazi again.
He couldn't stop being a judge.
Seems like it. Then he visited Sri Lanka, back to Malabar in the Maldives, then over to Bengal and Assam in the east, finally got on a ship, sailed to Sumatra, and then eventually reached China.
All the way to China.
Yep, hit a major port, Zitun, that's modern Quanzhou, traveled around within China, maybe even got to Beijing, before finally deciding to head home. He got back to Morocco in 1354.
After how long?
About 30 years on the road.
30 years.
Yeah.
Just, wow. And all this is in his book, The Rila. What was the point of writing it all down? Was it academic, like Al-Biruni?
Not really. When he got back, the local ruler in Morocco heard these incredible stories and basically ordered him to dictate them to a scholar, Ibn Juzay. And the stated purpose, according to Ibn Juzay, wasn't academic rigor. It was about recording the cities, events, rulers, scholars, saints.
Yeah, okay, documenting.
Yes, but the key driver was to provide entertainment to the mind and delight to the ears and eyes. Focusing on the curious particulars, the marvelous things. It was about sharing the wonder.
So less like building an intellectual bridge, more like bringing back amazing tales from faraway lands, the excitement of the unfamiliar.
Exactly that. He was a storyteller, wanting to convey the sheer variety and novelty of the world to people back home who could only imagine such journeys. Vivid, unusual, fascinating stuff.
We have to remember, this wasn't exactly first-class travel in the 14th century. The Rila must show the tough side, too.
Oh, absolutely. The source makes it clear. Travel then was hard work and dangerous. Journeys took ages. Multan to Delhi, 40 days, and to Delhi, 50 days. Even Gwalior to Delhi was 10 days. Serious undertakings.
And dangerous how? Just the roads.
Big time. Robbers were a constant threat. Ibn Battuta mentions getting attacked multiple times. He usually traveled in big groups, caravans, for safety, but even that wasn't foolproof.
He describes one bad attack, doesn't he?
Yeah, a really nasty one on his caravan, going from Multan to Delhi. Many people were killed, and he and the other survivors were badly wounded. It really grounds the adventure in reality.
Definitely. And it wasn't just physical hardship, there was an emotional side, too.
Yes, he captures that really well sometimes. There's this bit where he arrives in Tunis after being really sick on the road, so weak he had to tie himself onto his camel.
Oh, wow.
He gets there, people come out to greet the caravan, everyone's looking for friends or family,
Yeah.
but he knew no one. And he writes, very movingly, about feeling so sad at heart on account of my loneliness that I could not restrain the tears, and wept bitterly.
That's tough. 30 years on the road, often alone. That really humanizes him.
It really does. So he's facing danger, loneliness, but he's always observing, always looking for the unfamiliar. And how he described these completely new things is fascinating.
Because his audience back in Morocco would have no idea what he was talking about
Yeah.
otherwise, right? He had to find ways to explain.
Exactly. He used analogies, comparisons to things they would know. The coconut and the pain leaf are a classic example.
Ah, yes, the coconut. Described like a person's head. That's memorable.
Isn't it? He says the tree looks like a date palm, something familiar, but the nut itself resembles a man's head. It has what look like two eyes and a mouth.
That's uncanny.
And the inside, when it's green, looks like the brain. The fiber around it, the husk, looks like hair. He even mentions practical uses the fiber used for cords to sew ships together or for cables.
Eyes, mouth, brain, hair. It might not be botanically perfect, but you can totally picture how strange and alien it must have seemed. It definitely conveys the marvelous thing aspect.
Absolutely. It's vivid, inventive, and makes the foreign relatable in a quirky way.
And what about pain line? Chewing leaves. That must have seemed odd, too.
He describes the plant being grown like a grapevine, but just for its leaves, no fruit. Then he carefully explains the process. You chew areca nut first, broken up, then take the pain leaves, add a bit of chalk lime paste, and chew it all together.
He noticed the details.
Yeah, the whole process. Again, it's this careful observation of a cultural practice completely new to his readers, something he found worth recording in detail.
These details make it so tangible. And he was impressed by the cities, too, wasn't he? Places like Delhi.
Very impressed. He saw cities like Delhi and Daulatabad as buzzing with life, full of opportunities, especially for people with skills like him or merchants, artisans. Densely populated and prosperous was his take, even with occasional political chaos.
What stood out about Delhi?
He called it huge, the largest in India. He was especially blown away by the city walls, the ramparts, so they were without parallel.
How so?
Massive, 11 cubits wide, and not just a barrier, but with houses built inside it for guards, storerooms packed with supplies that could last ages, windows for light, stone base, brick top, tons of towers. He counted 28 gates.
28 gates. He mentioned specific ones.
Yep, like the Budon Darwaza being the biggest. The Mandwi Darwaza had a grain market right inside. The Gold Darwaza was next to an orchard. He even described the cemetery as beautiful, with domed tombs and flowers blooming all year round.
It sounds like a truly formidable, well-organized, even beautiful capital city he's describing.
It really conveys the scale and sophistication, and he noticed the markets, the bazaars, weren't just for shopping.
More like social hubs.
Exactly. Hubs of economic, social, and cultural life, often with mosques and temples right there, and spaces for performers, dancers, musicians, singers.
And his description of that singer's market in Daulatabad, Tarababad, is incredibly specific.
It's one of the most colorful bits. Tarababad, just for male and female singers, he calls it one of the greatest and most beautiful bazaars. He describes the shops, doors leading to houses behind, carpets out front, a female singer on a swing in the middle.
Wow.
The chief musician had a special spot. Singing and dancing went on till dusk. Even rulers, Hindu and Muslim, would apparently stop to watch if they passed by.
That's an amazing glimpse into public entertainment and social life. Why focus on that, do you think?
Well, it fits his goal perfectly, right? Recording the curious particulars, the marvelous things, a dedicated market just for singers and dancers that would be totally foreign and fascinating to his audience. Showed the cosmopolitan vibe. It was exciting, unfamiliar, exactly his kind of material.
Makes sense. And beyond the cities, he looked at the economy too. Agriculture, trade.
Yeah, he saw Indian agriculture as really productive, fertile soil, often getting 2 crops a year, and he clearly saw how plugged in the subcontinent was to trade networks across Asia, West Asia, Southeast Asia, all connected.
And Indian goods were in demand.
Hugely. Especially textiles, cotton, fine muslins, silks, brocades, satin, big demand everywhere, which meant good profits for artisans and merchants. He mentioned the best muslins were super expensive, only for nobles and the super rich.
So productive farms, skilled manufacturing, busy trade routes, a pretty dynamic picture. And he was really struck by the communication system, the post.
Absolutely blown away. He called the postal system unique in its efficiency. He saw how it helped merchants sending info fast, moving credit around, even dispatching goods quickly. He gives this amazing statistic. News could get from Sind to the Sultan in Delhi in just 5 days by post. The same journey took a person 50 days.
5 days versus 50. That's astonishing speed for the 14th century. How did it work?
He described 2 types, the horse post, the uluk, with royal horses stationed every 4 miles, and the foot post, the dawa, which was even more elaborate, 3 stations per mile.
3 stations a mile. How on earth?
It was ingenious. Every third of a mile, there'd be a village with 3 little pavilions outside. Men would be waiting there, ready to run, carrying a 2-cubit rod with copper bells on top.
Bells?
Yeah. The runner starting off would carry the letter or package, run as fast as they could, shaking the bell rod. The guys at the next station would hear the bells, get ready, take the item, and immediately run off, shaking their bells, to the next station just a third of a mile away, like a continuous relay race.
That is incredible. A human relay system with bells. And he thought this foot post was faster than the horses.
Yes, he observed it was quicker, and used not just for letters, but for valuable things needing speed, like getting those fancy Khorasan fruits, which were highly prized, transported quickly to India.
What an amazing detail. Really brings the ingenuity to life. Could that system have worked everywhere, though? Across the whole subcontinent?
That's a good question. The system he describes so vividly was likely along the major routes, the important imperial or trade arteries. Extending that kind of intense, high-speed, labor-heavy system across mountains or remote areas would be tough, but where it worked clearly worked brilliantly and left a huge impression on him.
So Ibn Battuta gives us this vibrant picture, full of the excitement of the unfamiliar, the buzz of the cities, the weirdness of coconuts, the speed of the post, capturing the dynamism and peculiarities for his audience back home.
Exactly. His Rila is so valuable because he noticed and recorded all these details of daily life, cities, trade, communication that locals might have just ignored as mundane. He saw opportunity, dynamism, marvels.
Okay, so we've had the scholar, Al-Biruni, and the curious explorer, Ibn Battuta. Very different takes. Now, our third traveler, François Bernier, comes along a few centuries later, 17th century, and his perspective seems, well, quite different again, more critical, maybe even negative.
Indeed, François Bernier, French. He was a doctor, but also very much a political philosopher, a historian. He arrived in the Mughal Empire around 1656, stayed till 1668, a time of upheaval after Shah Jahan, and the source says he came specifically in search of opportunities.
Looking for work, basically. Patronage.
Seems so, and he did pretty well, got connected to the court, first as a physician to Prince Dara Shuko, one of Shah Jahan's sons, and later associated with Danishmand Khan, an important noble, so he had insider access.
Okay, but his writing, it wasn't just observation, was it? He had an angle.
A very strong angle. His defining feature is comparison. The source says he was constantly comparing India to Europe, especially France. And here's the kicker. The comparison was always designed to show Europe, particularly France, as superior.
Always.
Always. Much of his writing took the form of letters back to powerful people in France, like Colbert, Louis XIV's main minister. So clearly, he wasn't just describing India, he was trying to influence policy and thinking back home.
By presenting India in a certain way.
Exactly. He used India as a kind of cautionary tale. The source calls it binary opposition, setting India up as the exact opposite, the inverse of Europe and therefore inferior. His goal was to warn European leaders not to go down the path he claimed India had taken.
So a political agenda driving his observations. Very different from Al-Biruni trying to understand or Ibn Battuta sharing wonders. Bernier was making an argument.
A very specific argument aimed at persuading his influential audience back home, and he was incredibly successful at it.
How so?
His books became bestsellers in Europe almost immediately. Translated into multiple languages, reprinted over and over. Unlike the earlier Arabic and Persian accounts that mostly stayed in manuscript form for centuries, Bernier's work got out there and had a huge impact.
Influencing how Europeans thought about India.
Massively, for centuries. Big thinkers like Montesquieu with his ideas about Oriental despotism, and even Karl Marx with his concept of the Asiatic mode of production, they drew heavily on Bernier's portrayal of India.
Wow, so his critical view really shaped Western ideas. What was his core argument? Why did he see India as so flawed, so inferior?
His main point, the absolute cornerstone of his argument, was about land ownership, or rather the lack of private property in land as he saw it.
He believed in private property.
Strongly. He saw it as the foundation of European prosperity and freedom, and he claimed very firmly that in the Mughal Empire, the emperor owned all the land. He just handed it out temporarily to his nobles.
And Bernier thought this was disastrous.
Totally disastrous. His logic was, if these nobles don't actually own the land and can't pass it down to their kids, why would they ever invest in improving it long term?
Makes sense from that perspective.
So he argued this led inevitably to the uniform ruination of agriculture. Nobles just tried to squeeze as much money out as quickly as possible, leading to excessive oppression of the peasantry and declining living standards for basically everyone except the absolute top tier.
He painted a pretty grim picture of the peasants' lives to back this up, didn't he?
Oh, incredibly grim, vivid, harsh language. Vast areas were just sand or barren mountains, badly cultivated and thinly populated. Even good land wasn't farmed, he claimed, because there weren't enough workers, many having died from bad treatment.
And if they couldn't pay?
If peasants couldn't meet the crazy demands of their rapacious lords, they lost everything. Even their children were taken as slaves, he said. This excessive tyranny was so bad, he claimed, it made people just abandon the country, flee.
That is a powerful, bleak image of total misery. And it all ties back to his argument about land ownership being the root cause.
Exactly. By linking this horrific picture directly to the land system, as he described it, he makes his case seem really strong. He explicitly used it as that warning for Europe. He wrote that if European kings adopted the Mughal model, their countries would become wastelands, kings of deserts and solitudes, of Begals and barbarians, cities ruined, fields empty.
A very stark warning.
Yeah.
But was he actually right about the emperor owning all the land? What do other sources say?
This is where it gets really interesting, and the source material pushes back hard. Official Mughal documents from the time, like Abul Fazl's writings under Akbar, they just don't support the idea that the emperor owned all the land outright.
Oh, how did they see it?
They saw the state's claim on the produce of land revenue as more like a remuneration for sovereignty, a payment for the protection the ruler provided, not rent for land he owned. European travelers like Bernier, maybe used to different systems, likely saw the high revenue demands and just assumed it must be rent. But the source says it was fundamentally a tax on the crop.
So his whole foundation,
Mm-hmm.
like the emperor owns everything, therefore no investment, therefore ruin, might be based on a misunderstanding, or maybe a deliberate simplification for his argument.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. His European background, his belief in private property, and his agenda to critique French absolutism by using India as a negative example all heavily colored his interpretation, plus the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
Rural society in the 16th, 17th centuries was way more complex than Bernier's picture of stagnant ruin. There were powerful local landholders, zamindars, different types of peasants, landless laborers, people producing goods for markets. It wasn't just uniform misery.
Okay, so the land ownership argument seems shaky, or at least heavily biased. What was his other big claim about Indian society?
He famously declared there is no middle state in India.
No middle class.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
His view was starkly polarized. You had a tiny, super rich, ruling elite at the very top, and then just enormous, undifferentiated masses of incredibly poor, oppressed people at the bottom. Nothing in between.
Just extreme wealth and extreme poverty, nothing else. That sounds overly simple.
It does, and it was a key part of his argument that India was inferior, lacking the social complexity he saw and valued in Europe. It also clashes quite a bit with what Ibn Battuta described and other evidence.
But surely even Bernier himself must have noticed things that didn't quite fit that picture.
Yeah.
Contradictions in his own account.
Absolutely, and this is where reading him closely gets fascinating. For instance, he argued artisans had no incentive to improve quality because the state would just take any extra profit, so manufacturing was declining.
Right, fits his oppression narrative.
But two, then he also admits elsewhere that vast quantities of the world's precious metals flowed into India. Why? Because Indian goods were being exported in huge amounts for gold and silver.
Hang on. How can declining low-quality manufacturing attract vast quantities of global wealth? That doesn't add up.
Exactly. It's a major contradiction. It shows his big theory bumping up against the economic reality he actually saw. In another bit, talking about Bengal, he describes it as extremely fertile, producing tons of goods like silks, cotton, indigo for export, even surpassing Egypt. He mentions other areas with lots of people, skilled artisans making carpets, brocades, fine cloths used locally and exported.
That sounds completely different from his general picture of ruin and lack of incentive. He's describing a vibrant export economy there.
He is. It's like he can't help reporting the economic energy he sees, even while his main narrative is about decline and oppression. The tension is palpable.
So much for no middle state. Surely he saw merchants, professionals.
Well, despite saying no middle state, he did notice a prosperous merchant community involved in long-distance trade. And the source points out these merchants were organized, with community ties, leaders like the chef or negar chef. Plus, there were other urban professionals, doctors, teachers, lawyers, painters, architects, musicians, serving all sorts of clients, not just the emperor.
So clearly, there were significant groups between the absolute top and the absolute bottom. And the cities themselves suggest this too, the population size.
Definitely. The source mentions that around 15% of the population lived in towns in the 17th century. That's a higher percentage, on average, than Western Europe at the time.
Higher than Europe. Wow. That must mean a pretty lively urban economy to support all those people.
You'd think so. It certainly challenges Bernier's simple rich-poor picture and suggests thriving urban centers with diverse populations and professions.
Yet Bernier dismissed the cities as just camp towns, dependent on the emperor.
That was his interpretation, yeah. Filtered through that negative lens again. He saw them as artificial, popping up when the court arrived, collapsing when it left. Lacking, in his view, any real viable social and economic foundations of their own, just dependent on imperial spending.
Again, sounds like an oversimplification to make India seem less stable than Europe. Were there other kinds of towns?
The source directly contradicts him here. Says there were loads of different types of towns, manufacturing centers, trading hubs, busy ports, important religious pilgrimage sites. These places thrived based on trade, production, religion, not just because the emperor happened to be nearby. Their existence points to those merchant and professional classes being pretty important.
It really feels like Bernier had his conclusion decided before he even started observing sometimes. What about the imperial workshops, the carcanas? Did he describe those?
He did, and it's actually a really valuable, detailed description. He talks about these large halls where artisans worked for the state embroiderers, goldsmiths, painters, weavers, tailors, shoemakers, all sorts of crafts, making luxury goods for the court, working under a master craftsman.
Okay, so large-scale, organized production. How did he describe the atmosphere? The workers?
He says they came every day, worked hard all day under supervision, then went home quietly in the evening. Quiet, regular manner is his phrase.
Sounds orderly. Productive.
You'd think. But Bernie's conclusion, he says in this system, no one aspiring for any improvement in their life.
Ah, there it is again. He sees organized work and reads it as stagnation, lack of ambition, reinforcing his whole theme of an unchanging, inferior East, even while describing skilled manufacturing.
Precisely the pattern. Acknowledge the activity, the skilled, the scale, but interpret it negatively through the lens of his comparative critique. It makes you constantly question how much is observation and how much is just fitting things into his pre-existing argument.
That's the big challenge with using Bernier. Amazing details sometimes, but so heavily filtered through his agenda. His views were often, as the source says, not always accurate, and definitely oversimplified. Okay, one more area. Both Ibn Battuta and Bernier, being male travelers in these societies, seemed interested in women or certain customs related to them.
Yes, that's common in traveler accounts from this era. Male travelers observing women in different cultures. Sometimes they just accepted things, sometimes they were shocked. The source highlights two things that caught their attention: slavery and sati.
Slavery was openly practiced. They saw it.
According to their accounts, yes. Slaves bought and sold in markets like commodities, exchanged as gifts between elites. Ibn Battuta mentions buying slaves himself to gift the Sultan and getting slaves as gifts too.
Did he notice differences among enslaved people?
Yeah, he mentions some female slaves at the Sultan's court were experts in music and dance, valued for those skills. Others were used for domestic work or carrying people in palanquins. He also noted that domestic female slaves were cheap enough that many families, not just the super rich, could afford to have them.
And Ibn Battuta had that chilling detail about spies. Female slaves used for intelligence.
Right, a very specific detail about court politics. He claimed the Sultan put a slave girl in every noble's household specifically to spy on them. These spies then reported back via female scavengers who could enter houses freely. It's a stark glimpse into how slavery intersected with power and surveillance.
A really unique insight. Bernier, though, he focused more on sati.
European travelers often did focus on practices like sati, the immolation of widows. They used it as a marker of difference, often framing it as proof of, well, barbarism compared to the West. Bernier definitely chose sati for detailed, graphic description. He argued that while some said women went willingly, he believed many were forced.
And he described witnessing one very graphically.
Yes, a really poignant description, the source calls it. Witnessing a sati in Lahore, a beautiful young widow, maybe only 12 years old, he guessed.
12. Oh my goodness.
He describes her as looking more dead than alive, weeping, trembling. Then how 3 or 4 brahmanas, assisted by an old woman, basically forced her onto the pyre, tied her hands and feet so she couldn't escape, and then this innocent creature was burnt alive. He writes about how hard it was for him not to just cry out in rage.
That's a truly horrific image and a powerful personal reaction. It's hard to forget.
It is, and it certainly served Bernier's purpose of highlighting something shocking to European eyes, reinforcing his critique of the society.
But, and this is crucial, the source reminds us that focusing only on things like slavery or sati gives a really narrow, skewed view of women's lives overall, right?
Absolutely essential point. Women's lives were infinitely more varied than just these extreme or shocking practices. Their work was vital in farming, in crafts, in supporting households. Women from merchant families were involved in business. There's evidence women could even take cases to court. They weren't just passive victims or confined entirely to the home.
Which highlights how travelers might focus on the dramatic, the different, the stuff that shocks their audience back home.
While the everyday realities, the crucial economic roles the agency women did have, might get overlooked because it wasn't sensational enough or didn't fit their narrative.
Exactly. It really shows how the traveler's own perspective, their interests, their audience, shapes what they choose to see and record and what gets left out.
So, wrapping this up, we've looked through 3 really different pairs of eyes. three distinct perspectives on the Indian subcontinent over several centuries.
We had Al-Biruni, the scholar, deeply immersed in texts, trying to understand, systematically compare, apply logic, even critique things like the idea of pollution.
Then Ibn Battuta, the ultimate traveler. All about curiosity, experience, the thrill of the unfamiliar, giving us those vivid details of city life, strange customs, the amazing postal system, focused on entertaining and informing through sheer wonder.
And finally, François Bernier, the critical comparativist, coming in with a clear agenda, use India as a negative example for Europe, filtering almost everything through his biases about land, society, stagnation, even when his own observations sometimes contradicted his big arguments.
Each one gives us unique nuggets, details of daily life, customs, systems that locals might have ignored as too ordinary. But, as we've seen, their observations are so shaped by who they were, where they came from, why they were writing.
Al-Biruni's academic lens, Ibn Battuta's adventurous spirit, Bernier's political agenda and comparative framework.
And comparing them, as the source suggests, really highlights those differences in observation and interpretation, how they could see similar things but describe or value them completely differently.
And the source makes that vital point about the missing voices, too. We have almost no travel accounts by women from this time.
Right. Or by people from the subcontinent traveling out. What did they think of West Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia? How did they describe the unfamiliar? Their perspectives are largely lost to us.
Which is a huge gap, reminding us how partial our sources always are. We need to keep looking for diverse viewpoints.
Which really brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on after this deep dive.
Yeah. Given how much a traveler's own background, interests, biases, intentions, how much all that shaped what they saw and wrote, how much can any one account, or even these three accounts, really capture the whole messy, complicated reality of a place and time?
What other kinds of evidence beyond just these outsider accounts might we need to look for to get a richer, maybe more balanced picture of these centuries in the Indian subcontinent?
It's that constant question, isn't it? Who's telling the story and why? Something to keep in mind. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.